Welcome to Unboxing History. I'm Christine Hopkins, co-host of the Unboxing History podcast presented by the Galveston County Museum.
And I'm Jodi Wright-Gidley, director of the Galveston County Museum.
As part of Unboxing History, every month we unbox an artifact that's part of the museum's collection. So, Jodi, what's the artifact for this month?
So in honor of Veterans Day, we've chosen a military topic to talk about in November. And so what I'm about to unbox are things that are related to Camp Wallace. Camp Wallace was a camp that served in many different ways, and we'll talk about those. It was on the mainland of Galveston County, and it is what is now Jack Brooks Park. And so Camp Wallace was in World War II time period. And so what I have in my box to unbox today are things from Camp Wallace. So this is a handkerchief with Camp Wallace logo on it. And I also have a pillowcase, which to me, I've always thought these things are very odd to come from a military site, but we're going to talk more later about, the significance of these. And so there are many pillowcases that have different messages from Camp Wallace. And I think they were pretty much designed to send back home to your family. So they'll have a little bit of a souvenir of where you were. And so this one has a poem on the back of To a Mother.
Do you want to read that?
And so it says, to one who bears the sweetest name and adds a luster to the same, who shares my joys and cheers when sad, the greatest friend I ever had. Long life to her, for there's no other could take the place of my dear mother.
Oh my gosh, so it makes you tear up. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Another thing I have is a postcard.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a postcard of a flag raising ceremony that took place at Camp Wallace in 1941. And this one has a message on the back that I thought was pretty cute. It says, having a good time, the Army life is not so bad, only it is very hot here. And so this soldier sent his postcard, I assume, back home to where he lived, and it's going to Pennsylvania.
Oh, so, where in Pennsylvania?
Tremont. It looks like it says Tremont, maybe Fremont. The writing's a little difficult to read. And then the Camp Wallace also served as a separation center for as the war was ending and soldiers were going back home. The Navy sent guys to Camp Wallace to be processed out. And so this is a little brochure that says, going home, it won't be long now. And so inside of it are all of these instructions on what day you're supposed to leave, what you should wear, what time is breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because you stayed at the separation center and went through the process for a couple of 3 days or so. And so this one was really interesting to me because my grandfather was at Camp Wallace. So he served in the Navy during World War II, and he was at Camp Wallace for his processing out process. And so he would have gotten something just like this that had his name inside and his time to report and that kind of thing. And so it was very interesting.
Wow.
So we're going to get all into the history of Camp Wallace today.
Well, there's a lot of history related to Camp Wallace, and I'm excited to learn about it because I'm not very familiar with it. So I hear we have an expert.
We do. I love having guest speakers who can tell us everything about everything. So today we have Shana Rawls, and she wrote a book all about Camp Wallace. And she is an expert on the subject. So that's who we're going to have.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Jodi for this interview.
So Shana, what got you started in researching and being interested in Camp Wallace history?
Well, years ago, my granddaughter and I, we would travel all over the community and take photos of different historical markers. And we would try and substantiate what was in the markers. And then I would write a Fun Fact Friday, pretty much every Friday, based on what was in the historical marker. Years later, Ralph Stenzel, our director, he walked in the museum, he had an aerial photo, and he placed it on the counter, and he thought it was the blimp face, the photo of the blimp face. Well, we looked at it, and I said, no, I think that's the road that goes into Camp Wallace, which is Jack Brooks Park, because it splits. And based on my research, I knew what the road looked like. And then Robert Baer, he was our president. He said, there's water tanks right there, and those water tanks are still out there. So we left the museum, left it to somebody to hold the fort down, and we took off, and we traipsed through the brush, and sure enough, the tanks were there. So that kind of started it with the clearing of the land and actually getting so involved. And then Robert Bear and myself, we wrote this book on Camp Wallace, and it's pretty much everything that you need to know about Camp Wallace.
So how big was Camp Wallace? I mean, how many acres are we talking about?
Okay, it was 1,600 acres.
Okay.
And it went all the way from the Catholic Church, Our Lady of Lourdes on Highway 6, and actually the County Fair building right there on Highway 6, went from there all the way to 1764, where the dog track is, well, was, but it was huge. And then they actually, our government took that land by eminent domain. So they actually had that land, but then they leased 1,600 additional acres for the rifle range. So it was big. It was
the
very
rifle
big.
range was part of Camp Wallace. That was
Yes.
part of the training.
Yes, yes.
The book that you have, that you've written, it tells the history of Camp Wallace and is what I'm sure is full of great photos. What are some of your favorite photos from the book?
Well, pictures of the men marching. And it's kind of fun when there's a lot of postcards. There were many, many postcards. And you find a postcard, the men are marching, and then you can kind of look in the background and figure out where they were located when they were marching. And there was 2 huge water tanks that were above ground tanks on the north end of the camp. And so I kind of look for the water tanks and try and visualize where they're at. They had what they called a special hospital. I don't really know what was special about the hospital, but they said it was comparable, or actually had more beds than Galveston. And the hospital was set up, it was kind of an outdoor setup, even though they had buildings, but they had coverings that joined all the buildings so that they could transport the patients, from one building to the next. And that's actually on the north end of the camp. The way the camp was laid out, it was in different areas, area 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, I think is how it went. And based on the building number, if the building number was 601, that would be in area 6. So you would know kind of based on the building number where you needed to go. And the hospital was 100, or that was area 1. And then a lot of the barracks were lined up in 2, 3, and 4. And then 5 was the colored encampment area. And then 6 was the POW area. And then the rest of it, actually not the 9 area 9 is Jack Brooks Park.
Okay.
So the rest of it kind of belongs to University of Houston. They own 925 acres, and then I think it's 644 acres that the county owns. That's considered Jack Brooks Park.
I know when you go out to Jack Brooks Park today, you even have brochures that people can pick up. And that will give them the information about Camp Wallace, and then the interpretive signage that y'all have out there that tells more of the story on each site area.
And then the book also tells a lot. And this will be everything that you need to know about Camp Wallace.
So Camp Wallace, I know, served a lot of different functions. I mean, for my grandfather, he was discharged, and it was the separation center for the Navy later after World War II. But what was it all during World War II? What other things happened there?
Well, they did training, 13 weeks each. Well, they had 13 weeks of training, and then they would get a new batch of, actually it was Army, it started out Army, a new batch of people to train, and then they would turn them up, do training for 13 more weeks.
So we know that it was a training center, like you've talked about. Was it also a place where POWs were held?
Yes. There were 500 prisoners of war that were stationed there. They actually were behind like barbed wire fence. They had one certain area that they stayed in, and they actually, the POWs liked it there because they weren't shot at. They got to they got to cook and clean. They went and worked in the fields. They, you know, they actually liked it there.
I've only heard good stories, and I've often wondered, is that reality? But I'm thinking it must have been.
Some of them actually stayed after the war. They stayed here. They didn't go back home.
And then I heard even some of them, they were, like you said, they worked, but some of them even went to Friendswood and picked figs.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot of farm work.
Dickinson, Friendswood, Altaloma, Arcadia, Hitchcock, they worked in a lot of fields.
Okay.
Yes. They were
That's
farmed out. Yeah. In the morning, they would drop them off. And then in the afternoon, they would pick them up, take them back to camp.
Yeah. Well, so I know, we've talked about Camp Wallace is where you can actually go visit today in Jack Brooks Park, and there's all these different foundations and stuff. Tell us more about what was there? What was life like? I mean, I think they certainly had places, barracks to sleep in, churches to go to, theaters. I mean, so what was life like?
It was a whole community set up. Yes, they had a service club that was real fancy. There was one strip through the place that was like what I would call the better part of town. And they had a big theater, seated 1,000 men. Then they had the service club. They had the officers' headquarters, and anyway, it was that part of town is actually not in Jack Brooks Park, though. It's part of University of Houston's property.
Okay. And I've been out to Camp Wallace, the site today at Jack Brooks Park, and I know that I can see some foundations and some bricks, but I don't really remember what all of those were. What you can see, was that barracks, or wasn't there
warehouses?
Also a bakery there?
Those are warehouses, yes. The bakery, they actually baked 10,000 loaves of bread a day.
Gosh.
One loaf of bread per every man. Now, I don't know how big the loaves were, but, and then there's water tanks out there that we've uncovered. That started it with the clearing. And then if you go around the circle, if you go in Jack Brooks Park, you can actually drive around and see the signage that we have out there telling you what each thing was. And one of the things that I'm, I guess, most proud of is there's one foundation out there that's called, it was the coal storage facility. And it actually served a dual history. Actually, the whole camp served a dual history. During the war, it was used. They hung meat in the freezer. They had eggs and things like that they kept cold in the refrigeration building. It was a whole building for that. But then after the 1947 disaster, they actually housed the bodies in that same facility so that people could come look at and see if their loved ones were there. So we have pictures of caskets all lined up on the steps of that building. But then they opened the camp to house families that were displaced from the disaster.
Okay. So you're talking about, just for everyone who may not be aware of it, it's the 1947 explosion that happened in Texas City.
Yes, April 16th, yes.
It's a big part of our county history.
Yes, it is. There's a lot of Galveston history right here in this area. Yes.
So, the things that we unboxed earlier, tell us about the pillowcases. Are there a lot of different kinds?
Yes.
What are they about? Tell us more.
I don't really know too much about them. I know a lot of them are different. I've never seen two that are alike. We did actually happen to find one on eBay that was a Navy pillowcase. Most all of them that I've ever seen are Army, but there was one Navy, so it's kind of special.
So the idea was really just to send them back home to your mom or your girlfriend or something like that?
Yes, I don't think they actually used them there. Yes, they just bought them in the PX and sent them home.
So the Camp Wallace book is very extensive. Like, how many pages is it?
500.
So that's a lot of words, but what else is in the book?
A lot. a lot of postcards. And I'm very grateful that the postcards were around at that time because they kind of tell a story. I researched the Galveston Daily News, so there's a lot of news articles in here, a lot of photos, a lot of, photos that we had at the museum, or I got from Ralph Stenzel, or purchased on eBay. A lot of eBay in this book also, but it's 500 pages, but it's not all reading. There's some reading, but a lot of photos, a lot of pictures. And some pages are in color, and it just tells about the camp and the layout of the camp. And there's maps, different maps, quite a few different maps of the camp. And hopefully people will get the book and actually research. I have had a lot of people buy the book, and then they have a million questions, and, we help them, and they've actually researched on their own and came up with different things that we didn't know. So,
yeah.
So it's fun.
I mean, there have been people at Camp Wallace from all over the country. So, people can read the book and they can go and actually visit what's left of Camp Wallace. What do you want people to take away if they want to learn about it or go visit? What do you want them to learn and take away?
Well, one thing I would like for Camp Wallace not to be forgotten about. I think it was real close to being forgotten. I would like for them to know that we have a rich history right here in our own area. And hopefully people will appreciate that, years from now.
What I think about is, my grandfather has passed away, and our generations that served in World War II are quickly passing away. And so before they do, we want to capture their story.
Yes, we do.
And so I think everyone should appreciate, if they can, to talk to those relatives that are still around and ask them about their experience.
And one of the things that we have, too, at our museum, we have a Camp Wallace building that we've just recently refurbished that's on the back behind our old school museum. And we set it up for nothing but military and Camp Wallace. So please come visit us at the old school museum also. It's on Highway 6 and Warpath Avenue. The Camp Wallace building has been, I guess it's taken about 2 years to refurbish. We're not quite finished with it yet, but hopefully one of these days, I'm in hopes that the lady that's over the University of Houston property, her and I have been working out there trying to find different ruins, and we've worked real hard to kind of identify things out there. And we want to set up countywide tours to start at actually probably start at our museum. People park at our museum, get on a bus. We go out to Camp Wallace out at University of Houston, then go to Jack Brooks Park, tour the park, all the ruins that are in the park, then come back up to our museum and tour our museum, it's a military museum. So
I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
So after the Camp Wallace shut down, you mentioned one of the buildings moved to where you are near Santa Fe ISD. What happened were a lot of the buildings moved and used for other things?
Yes.
What happened to the camp?
When it was sold, every piece was sold for surplus. And the school actually bought 7 of the buildings. One of them is still around. Well, of course, the one we have is still there. But there's another one that the school bought. They don't actually own it anymore, and it was the bus barn. Our building was used originally to house the kids for a school cafeteria. And so it was part of our building that we're in now. That was just an extension, and they used it as a cafeteria. And over the years, it's been different things. It was schoolrooms, it was the field house, and now it's a museum. This was a COVID project. Couldn't go anywhere or do anything, so I researched.
All right. So as you were researching for this book, what is something that you came across that really surprised you?
One of the things is a poem that was written by someone that was actually stationed out at Camp Wallace. His name was P.L. Main Vetter, and he wrote this poem titled A Hitch in Hell. I'm sitting here and thinking of the things I left behind. I hate to put on paper what is going through my mind. We've dug 1,000,000 ditches and we've cleaned 10 miles of ground. We've drunk our beer and whiskey in every joint in town.
Yes.
But there is one consolation. Gather round me while I tell. When we die, we'll go to heaven, for we've done our hitch in hell. And the poem goes on, but the end of it's kind of cute. When the final taps are sounded and we've laid aside life's cares, we'll stand our last inspection on the shining stairs. The angels there will welcome us. The harp will sharply play. We'll draw 1,000,000 canteen books and spend them in a day. Then we'll hear St. Peter tell us loudly with a yell, take a seat, you boys from Wallace. You've done your hitch in hell.
I like that.
Anyway, I thought it was cute.
So you mentioned where the museum is in Santa Fe at Warpath and Highway 6. When is it open?
It's open Monday through Saturday from 9 a.m. till noon. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we're actually open a little later. We're open until 3.
Okay.
So come see us.
One of the best parts about this Unboxing History podcast series is that there's always something, so many of us think we know so much history about this area and so much about Galveston, including me. But every time we do a podcast, I think you and I both learned something. And we hope that the people listening or watching the podcast are also learning something. So it was so wonderful to hear about Camp Wallace, and these museums that are available in the county. So, for people that haven't been to the museum, there's a whole section about our military heritage in Galveston County. And of course, as part of that, we have the Camp Wallace exhibit. But what else do we have? Beyond that?
Yeah. So our museum has a whole section about the military history of the county. It was all designed by Galveston County Historical Commission members who have really led the way with researching and preserving our military history. And so Galveston County's military history is really large. You start with the formation of Galveston and the formation of Texas, and they had a navy. You had the Battle of Galveston here during the Civil War. We had Camp Wallace. We had Fort Travis on Bolivar Peninsula. We had Fort San Jacinto and Fort Crockett on Galveston Island. So the whole county has quite a military history, and we tell some of that here. It's highlighting and featuring photos and a little bit of information about every military installation that has been in the county. We had a blimp base here. We've talked about that before. Texas City was actually the site of one of the very first groups of soldiers who were flying and experimenting with the idea of planes being a part of the military, which is huge today. But back then, it was a brand new idea. And so if you come to the museum, you'll get to see photos and learn about all of those places.
Well, so for people that are interested in doing more research, what type of research materials are here as part of the museum collection?
So besides what you can see when you come to visit our exhibit hall, we also have many more artifacts that are in storage that we can use for research questions. If people are researching this topic, we have a research library. We have the historical marker files. So if you are doing a research subject and it's about military history, let us know because maybe we can help you out or point you to an expert who knows even more.
Yes, there's lots of wonderful experts in the area. Well, and for those of you that may have family members that served in the military and grew up in Galveston County, is that something you might be interested in as far as adding to your collection?
Definitely. We collect anything at the museum that has to do with Galveston County history, and that includes personal family stories of people who have lived here and served in the military. Yes, definitely. And I also think that people should think about visiting if they can. There's history that happens and you may never get to see the place that it happened, but Camp Wallace and our military sites around Galveston County are places you can still visit and see remnants, and to be in that place of history is special.
Well, and you talked about exploring the parks with your kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I live near Camp Wallace, or what is Jack Brooks Park now. And so as my kids were growing up, I have two boys, and it's not always easy to find something that teenage boys want to do with their families. But that's what we did. We went out to Jack Brooks Park, and they have geocaches that tell the story of Camp Wallace. There's historical markers you can read about Camp Wallace. And so that was one of the adventures we did is go out and see that.
And you have a geocache here as well.
We do. We have a geocache out in the front area of our building. And so you can look for that.
Well, if people are interested in coming to visit the Galveston County Museum, when are you open?
So the museum is located inside the county building that's at 722 Moody or 21st Street. We are open for free on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 10 to 4. If you want to do a private tour or book our fun padlock mystery game, you give us a call or email and book that with us on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
And for those of you that don't know, the Padlock Mystery Tour it's ideal for families. It's also ideal for just a multi-generational group or just groups that want to do some team building because you're kind of following along. You're looking for these different clues and finding the solution, and you have the museum all to yourself. So it's really a great experience. Well, thank you so much. I think, again, you can find Unboxing History everywhere where you listen to your podcast. And again, it's so much fun to learn something new every time.